The 22nd day was the one I stopped writing in the log. Not because there was nothing to record. There was plenty. The slow decay of our port thruster array, the protein ration count dropping below the 3-week threshold, the 14 wounded in the forward hold whose gill membranes were darkening from fluid loss. There was plenty to log. I simply stopped believing anyone would ever read it. Our convoy had been 8 ships when we left the Thurl Passage. 2 of them peeled off in the first week to follow the Conclave's suggested route. A route the Conclave had assured us was patrolled, monitored, and considered a corridor of safe transit. We never heard from those 2 ships again. The other 6 of us held together until the Varech Shelf, where the dead current caught us and the drift began in earnest. One ship went dark on day 9. Another made a control burn for a debris field on day 14, hoping to use the iron mass as a gravity anchor and wait for pickup. We watched her go and did not follow. The math on her fuel supply didn't allow for it. The math on ours didn't either, but we did not speak that fact aloud. We sent signals. We sent them on the Conclave's standard emergency bands, on the old pre-Conclave frequencies, on the wideband pulse our engineers had rigged from spare parts in the 3rd day of the drift. We sent them on every medium we possessed. The void absorbed them all without comment. On day 16, the 3 remaining convoy ships drew close enough to run a single combined environmental system and save power. Our senior medic, a deep water specialist named Overith, with a pale ridging along her flukes that marks 40 years of open current work, moved the worst of the wounded between hulls to consolidate care. She did not tell me how many she expected to lose before a rescue came. I did not ask. Some calculations are not meant to survive in writing. I am Kesevel, navigation officer for the convoy tender Meridian Sound. I have traversed the Thurl Passage 11 times in my career. I have held a navigator's license for 31 years. I know the drift corridors of this sector the way I know my own gill rhythms. None of that knowledge told me how to find a current out of the Varech Shelf on fuel margins we had left. So I sat at my station and I logged what I could bear to log, and I sent our signal into the empty dark. On the morning of the 22nd day, I stopped. I do not fully remember the 23rd day. The records show I ran 3 course simulations, recorded a fuel status update, and authorized the reduction of environmental heat by 2 degrees to extend our power reserve. I do not remember making any of those decisions. The mind goes somewhere quiet when it has run out of useful work. The 24th day, I remember. Overith called me on the intercom at the 4th watch, which is the deep current hour for our kind, the time when the body slows and the mind drifts toward the dark water below thought. She said, "There is something on the long-range sensors. Not a debris signature, not a ghost reading, something with drive output." I was at my station in 40 seconds. It was a single vessel, running without a standard identification beacon, or rather, running with a beacon broadcasting on a military suppression frequency that our civilian sensors barely caught. She was small, frigate class by the drive signature. She was not moving like a ship that had detected us and turned to intercept. She was moving like a ship that had known exactly where we were for some time, had come a very specific distance at a very specific speed, and was now arriving at a point she had calculated in advance. I sent a hail on every frequency we had. The reply came back in 40 seconds. A human voice. Male. Unhurried. Speaking in conclave, standard with the particular flat vowels that humans produce when they have learned the language from a recording rather than from a native speaker. Technically correct, utterly without music. He said, "Meridian Sound. This is the independent support vessel Caraway. We have your position and your medical summary. Hold your current heading. We are 2 hours and 11 minutes out." I said, "How do you have our medical summary?" We transmitted no medical data. A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding how much to share. The pause of someone deciding how to say a thing that will be difficult to hear. He said, "Your signal went quiet 22 hours ago." We assumed the worst and planned accordingly. They had planned accordingly. The Caraway came alongside our lead ship at the hour he had promised, not a minute beyond it. She was, as the sensors had suggested, a frigate, a lean, dark-hulled vessel without the decorative patterning that most spacefaring species apply to working ships. She looked like a thing built entirely by engineers who had been told to solve a problem and had considered aesthetics a problem for another day. Her running lights were the deep amber that human vessels use when they want to signal non-aggression, a convention we know, because the Conclave taught it to us because humans had insisted on it in the charter negotiations 4 decades ago, and everyone had agreed and mostly forgotten. What she disgorged was something else. The first shuttle carried medical personnel, 6 of them, in the pressure-rated suits that human trauma teams use for multi-species environments, carrying cases of equipment I did not immediately recognize. Oberth met them at the airlock. I watched on the internal feed. The lead medic was a compact woman with close-cut gray hair who did not introduce herself, simply looked at Oberth's patient list, said, "Walk me through the gill cases first," and moved. Oberth, who has 40 years of deep current experience, who has seen every manner of field medicine practiced in 3 sectors, fell in a step behind her without a word. The second shuttle carried field rations. Not emergency rations, field rations. Specifically, the kind calibrated for cetacean metabolic profiles. There were enough for all 3 ships, all personnel, for 19 days. When I asked the crewmen supervising the transfer how they had known our species composition, he looked at me with a mild expression humans wear when they have done something they consider obvious, and said our signal had included a standard convoy manifest, and they had pulled the dietary specs from the Conclave registry. He said it the way one might say the weather had been clear. I did not ask the follow-up question that was forming in my mind, which was, you carried cetacean profile field rations aboard a human military frigate on the chance that you might encounter a convoy like ours. I did not ask because I was not sure I was ready for the answer. The third thing she brought was the repair dock. A mobile repair dock is a structure roughly the size of a small station module, folded for transport and expanded on-site. The Caraway had one clamped to her ventral hull in a configuration I had never seen on a frigate of her class. Her engineering team deployed it in 4 hours. By the time Oberth's human counterpart had stabilized our worst gill cases, the dock had enclosed our port thruster array, and 2 of her people were inside it, working. I sat with Captain Wren, the flat-voweled man from the comm, in the Meridian Sounds navigation room while his crew worked. He was tall, with the kind of unhurried stillness that some humans develop after long tours in the drift. He drank something from a sealed container and did not offer to explain what it was. I did not ask. I asked him instead how he had found us. He said they monitored a broad set of frequencies, including the wideband pulse our engineers had rigged on day 3. He said the pulse was, technically speaking, a violation of 3 conclave transmission ordinances, but that his ship's standing orders covered any signal indicating distress, ordinance compliant or otherwise. I asked him why he had come alone. He looked at me the way you look at a question that does not quite fit the shape of the world you live in. Then he said, there wasn't time to wait for a second ship. The Caraway's engineers finished the thruster work in 11 hours. Our fuel deficit they addressed by transferring a quantity from their own reserve that left them, by my calculation, with margins I would have considered unacceptable for a vessel operating this far from a settled system. When I said so, Captain Wren said their next port of call was close enough. He said it without looking at me, in the tone of a man who has decided the conversation on that subject is finished. They departed 6 hours after the repair was complete. No ceremony, no formal documentation of the rescue. Captain Wren said his ship's log would reflect a routine support action, and that if we wanted additional documentation for the conclave, we should file our own incident report, which he was certain would reach the appropriate office within 18 months. He said 18 months in the same flat tone he used for everything, and I was not entirely certain it was a joke. I watched the Caraway's running lights until they dissolved into the current. Then I opened the log and I wrote, Day 24, 1 human frigate, field rations, a trauma team, and a repair dock they had no business carrying. They left before I found the right words for it. I still haven't found them, but I kept the log open. That, I think, is the thing. After 22 days of silence, I had stopped believing anyone would read it. And then someone arrived who had already read what I'd sent, planned for the worst, and come anyway. Alone, ahead of schedule. I don't know what to do with that except keep writing.